Welcome to an invitation to sisterhood. We want you to join us on a journey as we explore women in the Bible and in Christian history who continue to influence our lives today. We're talking about the culture of death, primarily abortion and IVF versus the teaching of the church. Our guest today is Kathy Crombie from the Right to Life of Michigan. We're also featuring St. Gianna Beretta Molla. St. Gianna's feast day is April 28th, and she's the patron saint of mothers, physicians, and preborn children. She died in 1962. She was beatified by Pope John Paul II, St. Pope John Paul, that is. She refused treatment while pregnant with her fourth child in order to save her child's life. She died just days after giving birth. I'm Vanessa Denha-Garma. Welcome to the show, and I'm with my co-host, May Simon. May. An amazing topic. This is something really important in our culture today. And when we talk about the culture of death, it's such a huge and broad term, but we're really focusing on abortion today with Kathy Crombie coming on the show. But there's a lot that goes on with the culture of death. And as Teresa Tomeo always likes to say, it's about the womb to the tomb, you know? We're talking about, conception to natural death. And we're talking about contraception and euthanasia, and I was really shocked to see that narcissism was even in this broad definition of the culture of death and what's going on in the world today. Yeah,
I mean, when you look at the focus of the culture of death, it really focuses on self, while in the opposite spectrum, which is the culture of life, focuses on the goodness of others. You know, the focus is on what's good for others rather than just myself. And so it's not surprising that that narcissism would be part of that. But the culture of death is something that we all should be concerned about, especially as Catholics. We are all called to live a gospel of life, and none other put it better than Saint Pope John Paul II, who wrote Evangelium Vitae, and he actually begins his encyclical with the sentence of the gospel of life is at the heart of Jesus. And he beautifully talks about the dignity and the value of each human person that is brought into this world, including those who begin life in the womb. And so he addresses all those issues, from euthanasia to abortion to in vitro, as far as
contraception.
But
going back to the narcissism phrase and what you're talking about, St. Pope John Paul II.
Yes.
I remember, and it went viral, and there's I think there were two different women we were talking about. One girl writes a poem about aborting her baby and being very proud to do so. We've gone past the argument whether this is life. The pro-abortion groups are saying, well, we know this is life, but I have a right to do it anyway. And she actually wrote a poem, and it was all over the internet, how proud she was that she had the right to kill her daughter. And she knew it was a girl.
Yes.
And I think there was a video similar, I think it was another girl who actually said, today I'm having my abortion, I'm really excited about it.
Yes, and that, again, I think that really reflects the absence of what is good and loving the other. It focuses on self and not the other. I think that is proof of that, because when you remove God from the picture, then basically the person only focuses on themselves. And I mean, even looking at natural law, natural law dictates that killing is wrong, even if you take God out of the picture.
Sure.
And so it is really scary, actually, to think about that someone actually went on. But I would think that is probably rare, because, I think most women who have had abortions probably struggle with that decision and probably feel very pressured into having it because of their life circumstances. And so I hope that would be a very rare situation or instance, such as example of that girl who went online and
I would hope
and glorified it and completely took it, removed the conscience and the responsibility out of it. I have a good friend who had an abortion about 22 years ago. And she knew you know, at that time, the doctors had told her that there could be, that there are some medical issues with the baby. And so I believe she was in her second trimester, 4 months approximately. And, you know, while she loved God at that time and still does, I think there were so many pressures of, you know, of her circumstances, and she chose to go ahead and have the abortion. And I can tell you, you know, it's been 22 years, and to this day, when abortion comes up, right now, she really is still haunted by that. And she realizes that there is an impact. It's not, you don't just have an abortion, and you're done, regardless of the reason why you're having it. And so I think she's a perfect example of those women who do have abortions. This is not, oh, 1, 2, 3, I'm done. Okay, now we can move forward. They are it definitely impacts their life spiritually, emotionally, physically. Many women are no longer able to have children after having an abortion. Some cannot carry a pregnancy to full term. And so besides the emotional aspect, you know, many women suffer from depression. And so it's really, it's definitely an issue that impacts the entire world, because men and women make up this world. And so we all have a responsibility to address it. And in fact, again, I'm going to refer to Pope John Paul's Evangelium Vitae, and he actually mirrors it with the story in Genesis when Cain killed Abel, and God confronted him, asked him about his brother, and he lied. He lied to cover up this murder. And he said, am I my brother's keeper? This is, you know, and Pope John Paul, he actually says that this is what the culture of death does. So the abortion industry does just that, really, if you look at it. Am I my brother's keeper? They try to cover up what they're really doing.
And yes, you are.
And yes,
you are.
And we are definitely our brothers and sisters
keepers.
keepers, because everything that we do has a ripple effect on the world. You know, the messages that are relayed to the dignity of life, to the value of the human person. We are not animals. We have, you know, we were created in the image and likeness of God, and we were placed as masters over the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom. And so we definitely have a dignity about us and a value that cannot be overlooked.
Well, that's why it's so important for people to understand. You talked about pressures of having an abortion. A lot of young girls are pressured, teenagers, to have an abortion because it would be shameful for the families. I talked to a woman from a pro-life family center where she said she's had so many girls from the Middle Eastern community, the Chaldean community right here in the Michigan area, coming to her, and she said her biggest struggle is that she has yet to convince one of these girls not to have an abortion as much as she's talked to them, because the pressure facing the community or the family is much greater than saving the life of her child. And when you have your parents and aunts and uncles and all these people saying, well, you can't have that baby, you'll shame our community, you're actually encouraging your child to commit a sin.
And, you know, and that brings, I think, the issue of educating our people, educating people in general on chastity, for example, teaching our youth, our boys and our daughters and our sons, chastity, to remain chaste until marriage. You know, that's why that's why these things happen, because we don't necessarily follow what is good for us. And so education, I think, is part of it, as well as educating them on what abortion really is. How many, you know, I think when people find out what actually happens, or if they see a video or a picture of what is done to those babies, I think they might change their minds.
Well, I think Kathy Crombie will bring light to that, because I think that's statistically true. That one of the biggest lies we're told is not being told everything. Planned Parenthood are proponents of, this is about empowering women and giving women's rights. Well, if you really want to empower women, then put everything on the table and tell them exactly what will happen, what are all the research and the statistics out there, but they don't want you to know. They want you to keep you in the dark, so they don't educate you. And that's why we need to go to, Right to Life of Michigan for our information and support Right to Life, because they're telling you the truth. Exactly. And as Catholics and as Christians and those who follow Christ, we're obligated to do the research and do our homework and pass that truth on to our children.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Because the society, when our girls or our boys are getting their information from the world, they're being told a big fat lie.
Yes, that's true. And so I think definitely focusing on that, focusing on educating them, teaching them to be chaste, and teaching them their purpose and their identity in life as well. That will point, because that eventually points to the respect and to respect of human life. And so, and the options, like you said, Kathy is going to talk to us about what's out there, maybe for girls that can help them. Those who do feel that influence, and hopefully, parents and daughters and sons will benefit from the information that's going to be shared today. And
and because there is we'll talk about with Kathy too. There's so much devastating consequences that go along with abortion today, and this culture of death and desensitizing the world to life that it has on you physically, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, that we don't talk about in the world today.
Well, Pope John Paul talks about it. He specifically addresses women in Evangelium Vitae, and he says it beautifully. And this is what he says. He says, the Church is aware of the many factors that may have influenced your decision. And she does not doubt that in many cases it was painful and even a shattering decision. The wound in your heart may not yet have healed. Certainly, what happened was and remains terribly wrong. But the Father of mercies is ready to give you his forgiveness and his peace in the sacrament of reconciliation. And then he calls on them to become speakers of the culture of life, to use their experience and their suffering and their trauma to relay the message of life. And so
you see that every year at the March for Life.
Yes.
You see those stories. And I encourage people too, and I'm sure Kathy will reiterate that, is watch the coverage of the Right to Life on EWTN and listen to it on Catholic radio, because unfortunately the secular media does not cover it to the extent that you just mentioned. What St. Pope John Paul II was asking us to do is that talk about the culture of life, and those people who've experienced the culture of death in their life are the best examples to share their story.
Yes, and it's amazing. My kids actually went to the last one, my two older children, and they're always, that was not their first time, I think it may have been their third or fourth time, and they're always amazed at the number of young people that are there, and they always come back re-energized and empowered and just very encouraged that people are becoming, or there are people there that do recognize the value and the importance of human life and the significance of it. And so yes, that I'm excited to talk about that.
Well, when we come back, we're going to bring back on the show, Kathy Crombie is going to join us from the Right to Life of Michigan, and we're continuing our conversation about the culture of death as it pertains to abortion. Stay with us. And we're back talking about the culture of death as it pertains to abortion particularly. And our guest here is Kathy Crombie from the Right to Life of Michigan. Kathy, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is great.
You know, we talked about, May and I, that the phrase, the culture of death is so broad, but we're really focusing on abortion. But how important is this issue in the world today and in terms of the work that you do?
Oh, wow. Well, abortion is prevalent no matter where you go. Certainly in the United States, we know the numbers here and everything. And as we watch different countries, as they begin, some of the underdeveloped countries, as they become more developed, we're seeing that abortion is more interjected into a number of things that occur. Abortion is worldwide. The numbers are staggering. there are countries who are below repopulation rate right now. And so I've been doing a lot of research, and like Russia, for example, is below, Italy is below. We don't necessarily have numbers for China, but we know there's great numbers happening over there. So there are some countries now who are actually giving incentives to their people to have babies. Because they're below population rate. A country,
mostly European countries, though. Aren't
a lot of European countries, yeah.
But that would be a real change for China, because they were paying people. Actually, you'd be financially penalized if you had more than one child.
Yeah. So I did read something that said that China is thinking about changing that policy, but I'm not hearing that in the everyday kind of news. But who knows? I mean, there certainly are problems with all of that. Population replacement rate needs to be at like 2.1. And there are many, something like 80 countries that are below repopulation rate. Yeah, it's a scary thing.
Is that because of abortion, or
it's a huge part. It's a huge part of. I think when you start with the contraception issue, it goes to abortion, and everything kind of follows suit. You've got all of those things, but abortion, of course, plays a huge role in those numbers that are declining. Yeah.
Wow, I've never heard of that before.
Oh yeah.
That's an interesting statistic.
Yep.
What's going on in the world today. But, as May and I were talking about, there's so many risks that are involved in abortion that the mainstream world doesn't want you to know. They want to keep women in the dark, young girls in the dark, and they paint this picture about abortion. May said it best as if you just have an abortion and go on with the rest of your life, and nothing really is going to happen to you.
Yeah. Well, we live in a throwaway society, right? I mean, everything we get we throw out, right? And why should this be any different? According to people who are in the know, we find that it's really in the more developed countries who are having more abortions. There was a statistic that just came out today or this week about lower income women are usually the ones that people think are going to have the most abortions, and they're finding it's really the women who are that have more money, who are more educated. They're the ones that are having the abortions significantly better. So it's not necessarily the poor, which is what the pro-abortion side always says. Well, we need to do this because people can't afford to do this. We have to have abortions. They can't raise the kids. But abortion is just it's huge. It's everywhere. It's prevalent, and it's a matter of us standing for truth and saying, this is really a human person. You were saying that before, May, that it's a human person created in the image and likeness of God, and we have every responsibility to step up to the truth and say, no, we can't do this.
Absolutely.
We just can't do this.
Is there reasonings behind the increase of women in wealthy or in affluent families having the abortion? Is it because they just don't want more than 2 kids, or they're just not ready to have kids? Or
yeah, I guess there's a lot of reasons. But this reason cited, like they're in school or they're working. I mean, I'm from that generation that said, I'm woman, hear me roar, which means we all said, let's put that femininity aside, let's put our fertility aside, because we want to be just like the guys, because we need to get ahead in the profession and stuff like that. So some of that stuff still is prevalent. There's a lot of reasons why women choose abortion, but I think I think it's our educated women who, I know when I went to college, I was told to think logically, right? To step outside of my faith and think logically about this, and I did, and I came out on the other side of it, saying, I would never have an abortion, but who am I to tell someone else what to do? Well, that's clearly not a pro-life position at all. It's not good enough for me. Why is it good for you?
Because ultimately, that doesn't change the fact that you can't commit an evil for a supposed good. What the culture of life teaches as it's a good, it's okay, and so it does not change that fact. Even,
it doesn't change the fact.
Yeah, it doesn't change that fact. But that's very interesting. The women who were more affluent, were they married or were they single?
I haven't had a chance to really look at the whole study, but it's really interesting to see. It just came out actually, that I had seen it, so it's something to take a look at. So, but it debunks. This is one research study that debunks that whole thing, that it's the poor woman, who shouldn't have all those, who doesn't want all those children. Well, that's not necessarily the case.
Well, there's a lot of research that debunks what the other side is wanting the world to believe.
Sure.
And they don't want you to know, and this is scientific research that really has nothing to do with the faith perspective, but the ramifications of depression are links to breast cancer and abortion.
Yes.
I mean, you can touch upon all those things that affect a woman that the world at large really don't want women to know.
Yeah, and it's going back to your other question too that I didn't really answer, was the point that there are consequences to abortion, and many women don't know this, many men don't know this, and it's just a matter of us educating people. There are over 100 physical and emotional consequences to a woman who's had an abortion. That doesn't even take into account the spiritual aspects of things. So, like what? So hemorrhaging, inability to have children, lack of sex drive, lack of trust. Post-abortive women are 9 times more likely to commit suicide. Now, you want to talk about depression, and so many women don't understand some of the things they're going through. I have a friend, a Catholic woman, a beautiful woman, who had 3 abortions before she knew better. And she'll tell you that all of those things are true, and there's not a day that goes on in her life that she doesn't think about what she's done. But we serve a loving and merciful God. Thanks be to God that there's a sacrament of reconciliation for those who are truly sorry for what they have done. The Church in its great mercy sees this. But there are consequences to every choice. And when people talk about pro-life and pro-choice, you're saying life and choice? There's no choice. It's life and death.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's nothing there.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yep, that is true.
I had somebody tell me one time, they said, right to life. The opposite of that is left to die. It's really interesting, but that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
But it's not about choice. And we need, as a society of people, as Christians, as Catholics, as those who believe in the gospel of life and what's taught in the Church, we need to stand for truth, and we need to use the words properly. It's not pro-choice. It's pro-abortion. We need to call it what it is.
Yeah, and they hate that argument too. When
Yes, they do.
It's pro-abortion. Oh no, I'm not pro-abortion. I'm pro to having choices.
Yeah.
And what we talked about in the first segment is that if women really had all the information at hand, Kathy, would they really choose abortion? Because they keep women in the dark when they go into the abortion clinics. They don't want them to see the baby in the womb.
They don't.
They don't want to give you all the information. So you're really being duped. These women are being duped because they don't want to really empower you and educate you, because they don't want you to know the truth.
Right. Well, and I'll take it a step further, because working in the multicultural area, I talk to a lot of women, and a lot of women who've had abortions, and they'll actually say that the medical community actually help direct them to an abortion, which is something they might not have considered, or some feel pressured by that. Some feel pressured not just by them, but by their families and by the boyfriend or the husband, or what. Women feel pressured. They wouldn't always choose abortion. We know, in particular, when you talk about who would lead a woman to an abortion, that we know that the man in the relationship, because if there's a pregnancy, there's a man somewhere. There's a birth father there somewhere. That if he says nothing to the woman, she will probably go get an abortion. It's really that interaction. When men say, I should have no say in this. Well, legally they don't, unfortunately, because we don't recognize in the law that child in the womb is a person. But that man has a responsibility, and when he speaks up and says don't do it, a lot of times she doesn't do it. If the family will get around that young woman with help and hope, chances are she won't do it. If the church community gets up and around that woman, chances are she won't do it. She feels alone and neglected, and she doesn't know where to go.
I can imagine. I mean, it's scary when you don't have support, especially if you go beyond that and you're going to get ridiculed and criticized by your family, by your community, and the pressure is even greater. I mean, you made a really good point when the medical community is referring you to an abortion. I got pregnant later in life, and I was considered a high-risk pregnancy because I was past the age of 35. And I can't tell you, every time I went to the appointment, it's like, well, are you sure you don't want to take these tests? Because you have up until this time to, terminate this pregnancy if it's not normal. I didn't take any of those tests, any of those to see if the baby was normal or not. What was the point? I mean, I was not going to abort the baby no matter what. And I remember I was approaching my 7th month, and my doctor says, well, there is a doctor in the state. This is your last chance.
Case in point.
And I finally said, I'm not taking one test. I don't want to know. I mean, if the baby's healthy, thank God. If the baby's not healthy, I'll deal with that when that happens. But you're right, the medical community wants, says, well, are you sure?
Yep.
Are you sure?
That brings
those
up
tests
yeah.
are not always accurate.
No, they're not.
Right.
I wish I had a nickel for everybody who came in and said, you know what, my doctor told me I should abort one of the twins, or I should abort this child, and I said no, and the child was born perfectly healthy. I am telling you, I've heard that story so many times.
Which
is why it is really important. For example, my OBGYN that I had when I had my 4 children, while he was not Catholic, he was not a physician who performed abortions, and so I know he was pro. Right, so I knew that he was pro-life to some degree, and so it is really important, even as a pregnant woman, if you hopefully if you decide to keep your baby, that your physician be a pro-life physician.
Absolutely.
So you do have to do the research, because they do influence your decisions, your outlook. They do try to kind of sway you. And so that is very important as well. You want that support throughout your pregnancy.
But few people ever think about that.
Yeah.
Because it just doesn't seem important at the time until you start talking about things like this.
Yeah.
So, I think shows like this are great. I think educational opportunities where we talk about these things openly. I mean, how do people learn? You have to tell people. You have to help show them where the research is. You have to help direct them. And so, the people will perish for the lack of knowledge, right? That's exactly happening here.
What you do, Kathy, is that educating. Is that majority of what you're doing, and the resources available on your website is so people can go to the Right of Life Michigan and find out this information, because it's not accessible everywhere.
No, it's not. Right of Life Michigan is a statewide organization, and so we're an organization of diverse and caring people who believe in life from conception to natural. Actually, we say fertilization now because it really does oftentimes happen now in petri dishes, and it's still life, right? But fertilization to natural death. So we're the voice of the voiceless, and so we take every opportunity to educate. We're also very involved, legislatively. We helped enact laws. We have a lobbyist in Lansing, because when Roe v. Wade became the law of the land, this issue became political.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
So how do you change things? You change one heart at a time. You change one mind at a time. You change some of the things that are happening legislatively. You work with people to do that. But the bottom line is, a lot of what we do is education. We have a website that's a dynamic website, meaning it changes constantly with updated information. All of us across the state are out teaching and working with our over 80 affiliates throughout the state of Michigan, who are like little Right to Life of Michigans in their own area. They know the local climate, they know what needs to be done, and so they tap into the larger organization, and then we help them as well. And so we're able to really move a lot of people at one time, which is really wonderful. So the work that's been done, well over 30 some years has been amazing. I'm just a part of that. I've been on staff for about 15 years. But education is a great deal of what I do personally as Director of Multicultural Outreach within the African American community, the Hispanic community, and now the Chaldean community, working a great deal to bring education to light. And that's not to say that we don't work in the others, but these are the 3 primary ones. And African Americans are having more abortions than anybody, followed quickly by the Hispanic community. And we know now too that it's happening in the Chaldean community. So we thank you for the opportunity to share information like this.
What about,
and it's on the rise. I'm sorry.
Yes.
What about, so when you are educating them on what abortion is and the effects of abortion, what about, do you talk to them or inform them of, for example, single mothers or those who have been cast out by their families or what have you, safe havens that they can, do you also educate on that and give them information on that?
We can't be all things to all people, and we try to focus on those issues of life and where we need to be. And as it affects the issues that we're involved in, we do that. Now, having said that, in conversations with people, of course, we have those conversations. We provide resources. We work. We make information available at the crisis pregnancy centers, the post-abortive counseling things. We make information available about whatever information needs to be had. We help to do that. And if we don't have it, we certainly point people in the right direction. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but but the safe haven meaning, are you talking about, just tell me what you mean by safe haven.
Somewhere where they can, whether they're getting housing or support or medical supported, you know, because maybe a lot of these girls might be young and they're cast out.
Well, don't the
as I said.
crisis pregnancy centers refer them to?
Yeah, they do a number of times. And so, and Right to Life Michigan's website, which is www.rtl for righttolife.org, there is a whole thing on there where you can kind of click into it, and we bring up all the pregnancy resource centers in the state of Michigan, by county, by city, and all that, which is a great resource.
Sure.
So that women can get a hold of that. There's also a 1-800-57-WOMAN number that people can call. So if they're someplace and they need help and they're pregnant, they don't know what to do, and they can call this number and there's immediate help directing them to the closest crisis pregnancy center.
You know, part of the umbrella of the culture of death, Kathy and May, is, you know, artificial insemination, IVF, which is really on the rise, versus church's teachings and what NAPRO is. And so, and I wasn't really familiar with that until recently myself. But IVF is very common, and I know, and it's very openly discussed, and I know probably 20 women myself who have had many in vitro fertilizations, multiple in vitro fertilizations, and that really falls into the church's teachings on the culture of death. Can we talk a little bit about that? And I remember somebody, you know, I have one child, and I remember a few women in my family saying, well, why aren't you just doing IVF? So-and-so did it, and so-and-so did it. And I said, well, do you know what really IVF is? I said, do you understand that they're taking, you know, my egg, my husband's sperm, they're putting it in a petri dish, they could fertilize 13 and implant 3 in me, and then if I don't want those other babies, they're just disregarding them. They're throwing out my babies, you know? And they're like, what? I mean, a lot of people don't understand even what IVF is in the process.
And you just hit the nail on the head. There's so many people who don't understand what it is. And so it sounds like an opportune procedure to help them to get the baby that they want. It's a complicated issue.
Very complicated.
It is incredibly complicated. Yeah, there is a lot complicated. I would say that for those people who are considering IVF, to first of all know that it is not within the teachings of the church. It is not a pro-life position in any way, shape, or form because of the aftermath, those extra fertilized embryos that are thrown. Those are human lives. There's also oftentimes they implant several fertilized embryos into the woman. And so they come back and say, oh, you know, we planted 3 and 2. You're pregnant with 2, and they go, oh, we only wanted 1. Well, let's do a selective reduction, which is abortion. See the words they use, selective reduction. It's abortion. Let's call it what it is. You know,
all these deceptive terms. They're all deceptive.
I actually had someone tell me that she had in vitro, and she said, if I have, they implanted 4, and if I have more than 2, I'm just going to have selective reduction. I said, so you're going to kill 1 baby? And she looked at me like, what do you mean? I said, well, you're going to. How are you going to decide like what baby to kill? I don't even understand that. You know, it boggles my mind.
Absolutely. Well, not only that, you decide which one you're going to kill. So it's the value of that life. That's where we're at now. We're at the value of the life, not as a human being. It is. It's the value. So even in the whole process before they implant those fertilized eggs into the woman, right? There's a selection of which ones are the best.
Oh yeah.
The value. I mean, holy cow! What have we done here?
It's like playing God.
Absolutely playing God. Absolutely playing God.
So, and while we are co-creators, we are not to. This is life is sanctifying, and so we should not treat life in such a way.
And what the church teaches about the marital act, the conjugal act, is that it should be within the context of a sacramental marriage, and it should be between a man and a woman, right? And it should be unitive and procreative. What does that mean? It means that the man and woman come together in that marital embrace, that's unitive, and procreative means they need to be open to life for the fruitfulness of life, which is children. And so if you separate those two, one or the other, it is outside the teachings of the church. Pretty easy to understand. Now, I would say, I was on the U.S. Catholic Bishops website, and there's a guide they have, which is called Reproductive Technology, Evaluation and Treatment of Infertility, Guidelines for Catholic Couples. How about that? And it's really quite good, and it's short, so it explains what everything is. But on the back it says, the question is, how do I know when a reproductive technology is morally right? And here's what it says. Rule of thumb is this.
Yes.
Any procedure which assists marital intercourse in reaching its procreative potential is moral. Procedures which add a third party into the act of conception or which substitute a laboratory procedure for intercourse are not acceptable. So that's the short of it. So how do you break that down? Well, I was looking at stuff because you asked me about NAPRO technology,
Yes.
which is certainly sanctioned by the church. And although I don't know about all the ins and outs of it, I can tell you that NAPRO is based on the Creighton model of fertility, which is also sanctioned by the church and started by a doctor by the name of Dr. Thomas Hilger. And it's a whole look at a woman's, not just her fertility, but her entire health. And it's based on that Creighton model. And so it could be a whole health system, it is a whole health system for women based on your fertility. So many infertile couples never really kind of find out why they're infertile, but NAPRO technology can help with that. And they've helped many infertile couples have children. So that's terrific, and I would suggest people to take a look at that. The other things I looked up, which is interesting, was one called lower tubal ovum transfer, which, yeah, it's a long thing.
I never heard of that.
Yeah, which it's called, and it's the acronym is LTOT, and it says most theologians think that this is immoral, or no, they think it is moral, which is, if I understand it correctly, if there's a blockage in the woman that prevents
the fallopian tubes, you mean? Okay.
My understanding is that's what it would be. If that's where it's at, what they do is they help move that egg along past the blockage, so that in the natural act of a husband and wife coming together, conception happens in a natural way.
Well, there's a
That makes sense.
procedure. Yeah, there's
that
actually a
makes sense.
procedure that to look to see if there's a blockage, and what happens is they rush this fluid in you, and they're trying to see, do you have a blockage, some sort? Did something happen to you, or in your fallopian tubes, or? And oftentimes, what happens is whatever the blockage is pushed out by that fluid and enables the couple to naturally conceive.
Yeah,
and
that's interesting.
You're not doing anything except just flushing your fallopian tubes, which sounds like what they're talking about.
Yeah, I don't know. I found it, and it was really interesting. In fact, it talks about it again on the USCCB website. And then there's another one called the GIFT, which means gamete intrafallopian transfer, and that one's somewhat controversial. And the church has not come out one way or the other on it, which means, what does that mean? It means that through the counseling of your priest, I would think, that you come to a decision about whether or not this is right for them or not. So,
what is that one? Does it explain what that is?
well,
Is it
it's more. To be honest with you, I forget all the ins and outs of it. Let me see.
But it's called the GIFT.
It's called the GIFT.
But that's why it's important to know how the procedures are carried out.
Yeah.
Because that those actually reflect on whether they're good for, according to God's God,
church's
law or
teaching.
church's teaching, or whether they're not. And so it is important to be aware of how all these procedures are carried out,
And
especially
actually,
if one is considered for
now
themselves.
that give me time to think about it, it's actually, what's controversial about it is that it actually collects the semen from the man after the act.
I remember this.
So and there's a way that it's all done.
That
but
is
it's
a big discussion.
It is a huge discussion,
Yes.
and theologians are back and forth on this, and
yes.
there is no agreement at this point. And even with the lower tubal ovum transfer, it said most theologians think it's moral. So again, these are all things that are outside the
I
norm.
think IVF is really more clear cut. I mean,
it is clear cut.
And I'm not on this earth to judge anybody, and I know what it's like to really want a baby, not be able to get pregnant or have more. But logically, you just look at what happens. I mean, and you're really still being selective of the baby, the fertilized egg. And then what happens to they don't fertilize one or two, they fertilize like 14.
They do. But let's go back to the dignity of the human person again. Now we're making that child. It's the parents want the child, right?
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful thing. I mean, I understand that, but the child is the end. It's like a product. It's
Yeah,
like a commodity.
yeah.
You know, and that child has. It's not an object.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
And we do need to remember that, and we also need to remember we need to be compassionate about all this, but it's not our right to be parents. It's God's gift, and we're supposed to be open to life, and sometimes that's not God's plan. Maybe the plan is to adopt, or maybe not, or you know, I mean, that's what it comes down to. Being, you know, really believing and trusting in God is that He has a plan for us, and we have to be open to what it is.
Absolutely. We can all, in one way or another, parent others,
Yes.
children.
Yes.
You know, whether it's by being a teacher, or whether it's by being a nurse, or really by being the friend of a friend. I mean, we all have opportunities to parent others, and so we don't have to be necessarily you know, biological parents.
Absolutely.
Or a really good aunt.
As you said, there's aunts, yes,
No,
there's
I mean,
adoption.
Right.
But yeah, but it's true, it's sad. It's almost as if, you know, that human life doesn't have that integrity or that dignity. It's being used as a product.
As a product.
It's not a human life, as if it's not a human life.
And we've taken the will of God away. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like when you give up everything to God and say, okay, God, is this your plan for me? I'm just going to will it to you. And maybe His answer to you is, no, you're not meant to be a parent, or no, you're not
Right.
meant to have more than one, you know?
Right.
I have a sister who never got married, doesn't have kids, but she is like the rock for all of us that do. You know what I mean? She's the one that helps us when we need help. And,
Sure.
you know, I look at that was God's plan for her, to be
Yeah.
that aunt to our kids and that support that we need as moms.
Right.
And there's a lot of people out there that, you know, are so needed in the world, you know, to help you with your kids, you know?
Especially with women, God created us, you know, to be, we are by nature, by God's creation, nurturing and very motherly, regardless of whether we're able to physically have a child or conceive a child or not. And so it's created within our nature.
We were
And
created to make room for another, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely.
And it's, you know, Pope St. John Paul II wrote something about in Evangelium Vitae. I'd like to share this really beautiful quote where, as far as taking God out, he says, this is Evangelium Vitae 22, paragraph 22. So when the sense of God is lost, there's also a tendency to lose the sense of man, of his dignity and his life. Without God, the human person is merely another animal without a transcendent dimension or destiny. Without God, human life is not a great gift with inherent meaning and purpose, but a thing to be used. And that is what happens, as you were saying, when you take, you know, God out of the picture. There's a reason why we are created the way that we are, and in His likeness and image, and we need to recognize that when dealing with life. Co-creators with dignity.
Absolutely.
And then there's women, like we talked about Saint Gianna, who chose her child's life,
Yes.
you know? And
That's
there's modern day
heroic.
women. Yeah, heroic.
Absolutely.
And there's modern day women. There was a woman not too long ago I read on Facebook, and she had cancer and she refused to get treatment.
Yeah.
And the doctors basically told her, you will die. And she's like, so be it. And she died after giving birth. The cancer had ridden her whole body. I'm amazed by those women. Those are heroes. But
Absolutely.
that is truly choosing life.
Yeah.
And if people are thinking about needing to be prayerful, maybe you ask the intercession of Saint Gianna to help you during these trying times. Maybe you are pregnant and don't want to be pregnant. Maybe you're a single girl and pregnant and scared to tell your parents. I mean, this is a time to ask for prayer to our Blessed Mother and to Saint Gianna for that intercession, because these are tough decisions.
Absolutely.
And especially when you do want to get, have a baby, and just surrender that will to God, and maybe it's His will and maybe it's not His will.
Yeah, that's so hard for people, and it sounds like there's no compassion when.
It is very hard, believe me.
Yeah,
it is.
Absolutely.
I mean,
my heart goes out to people who want children and
me
can't
too.
have them.
I know. Me too. And I thank God every day I have my daughter. But someone said to me the other day, yeah, people were talking about you saying, why didn't you have more? Like, are you so into your career? I'm thinking, okay? It was like, just cast this judgment on me. Like,
But we are more than just, I think what people maybe sometimes, you're right, it is hard. I think what we need to keep focus of is that we were created for more than just to be mothers. We are sisters, we are wives, we are aunts, we are friends, we are teachers, we are co-workers. There is more to us than just motherhood.
Yeah.
And at the same time, like we talked about, as women, we have that that nature that God has created us with. We can be motherly, and we can still be fulfilled and experience mothering.
Right.
yeah. And sometimes we mother other people's children.
And we're so
Yes.
good at it.
Yeah. We're like fastly running out of time here, Kathy. I just want to ask one last question about evangelizing our faith. And some of us evangelize by going to March of Life every year.
It's
I
great,
know May's
great,
kids
great,
have
great.
gone. And
Yep.
can you just, more and more Chaldeans are going. And
I
more
know, I
and more
love
different
it.
young people are going. And before we let you go, tell us why going to an event like that is so important for us.
Oh my gosh. Oftentimes I think in the pro-life movement we feel so alone because, so many people out there are not on the same page. But when you go to something like that, when you go to even like dinners for the Right to Life Michigan holds and things, and we do different conferences and stuff. But when you go to the March for Life, you realize that you are not the cheese who stands alone. You are in the company of, oh my gosh, what, 1 million people at least that show up, that can be there on a cold day in January.
Yes.
And I've been several times, and it's exhilarating. I mean, it's absolutely exhilarating. And you were right about the young people. Oh my goodness, they are there in droves. And it just warms your heart because you know that one day they're going to take over for all of us. And they understand that they could have been aborted and they weren't. That we all chose life for them. And they want to be able to choose life for others. And they're making a stand and they're making a difference. So one thing I always tell people the first time they go is when you get in that big, long procession that's going on, you don't have a sense of how many people are there. You just don't.
Yeah.
So there's one point where it kind of goes up the hill towards the Supreme Court. And so people get out of line, turn around, and look back.
Yeah.
Oh my
Wow.
goodness, the throngs of people.
I can just see it in my
blow
head.
your mind.
I've seen it on television.
Yes, on
to
television
see just
too.
the river.
Oh my
of people.
goodness,
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Well, Kathy
Yeah.
Crombie, before we let you go, just one last, give us your website out again. And
Yeah, it's www.rtl.org.
thanks, Kathy, for being with us here on Invitation to Sisterhood. And stay with us, everyone. We're going to wrap up the next segment here on Invitation to Sisterhood with our pledge. Welcome back to an Invitation to Sisterhood. Well, we talked about a very broad topic, which is the culture of death. But Kathy Crombie from Right to Life of Michigan really shed some light on the issue and narrowed down the importance of this issue. And we brought in with us St. Gianna, Beretta, Moeller. But, there's so much that encompasses the culture of death, May, that it's really hard to get into one show. And that's why it's so important to have this ongoing conversation with the people in your life, your children, your daughters, your sons.
We have to consistently live a culture of life. And because it's true, the culture of death has so many different perspectives. And there are so many different aspects of its impact on the culture of life. And so yeah, we definitely learned a lot, and so that was great.
The culture of life versus the culture of death is the perfect example of, I live in this world, but I'm not of this world. It's like having one step foot and one step out. And, and it's so easy to get, kind of pulled into what society says we should be living in and desensitizing ourselves to life because we're so surrounded by the culture of death and it's so accepted.
I think, it's accepted due to the fact, again, we mentioned this, and I don't want to keep beating the
horse.
Yes, the horse, exactly, however it's said. But it is, when you take God out of the picture, we start living just as any other animals do, really. And so we overlook our significance and our importance as human beings, and how we affect the lives of others, and the meaning that we can create by our lives is also impacted. And so Yeah, definitely there's a huge difference between that. The
And
culture
you know,
of
in the
death and
show we
culture
brought
of
in
life.
Saint Gianna, who truly, as Kathy says, is a hero.
Yes.
And she chose life. She was pregnant with her 4th child and had many health issues, and she chose to have that child. And she died shortly after that child was born, and she was beatified by Pope John Paul II, Saint Pope John Paul II, and died in the 60s. And there's a prayer I'd like to read and share with our viewers. God our Father, we praise you and we bless you because in Saint Gianna, you have given us one who witnessed to the gospel as a young woman, as a wife, as a mother, and as a doctor. We thank you because through the gift of her life, we can learn to welcome and honor every human person. You, Lord Jesus, were for Gianna a splendid example. She learned to recognize you in the beauty of nature. And as she was questioning her choice of vocation, she went in search of you and the best way to serve you. Through her married love, she became a sign of your love for the church and for humanity. Like you, the Good Samaritan, she cared for her child.
That's beautiful.
That's beautiful.
That is an example of self-giving, sacrificial love. That's how we are to love others.
And that's
know?
the culture of life.
Yes, and that is the culture of life, and wherefore the culture of death, focuses on loving myself. And she chose to love the other before herself, and therefore sacrificed her own life for her child. And that is what God intended for all of us, that self-giving, giving of ourselves fully, to the point of sacrifice, because we have to remember this life is only, it's not permanent. It's only temporary. And so while we are living on this earth, we should really reflect what we want to live in the everlasting life.
Sure. And this is such an example, a good show to set the example of asking God for what your will be done. What is your will for me, God? And when we struggle with unexpected pregnancies or wanting to have a baby we can't have, and really surrendering it to God and getting in touch, and as Saint Gianna did, pray and ask for Jesus' guidance in these troubling times and let God's will be done. And sometimes when we are disconnected from God, we make not so good choices.
Well, that's because then we look to ourselves to be the guide and the compass of morality and righteousness, where only one is that guide. And so that's where we start to get off. We need to have a moral compass. Otherwise, everything is relative to this person and that person.
How we feel.
Yes, there is a definite right and a definite wrong. And if we only rely upon ourselves, then we will not, whatever choice we decide will not be the right choice. We need to rely on what is goodness, and that's God himself. Rely on him, trust in him, ask for his guidance, pray to him. And so when we look beyond ourselves, rather than focus on us, we're able to make the right choice. We're able to see the big picture.
And talk about these issues, because it's so easy to brush them under the rug. Like Kathy said, there's a growing number of abortions happening in the African American community and the Hispanic community and in the Chaldean community. She's Right to Life of Michigan, and a large Chaldean population is here. And there's a lot of people in our community are going to be very upset we're even talking about this, that we even mentioned this. Like, how could you talk about abortion in our community?
Because truth is hard to hear.
Yeah.
Truth, what's good about truth is that it sheds light. Whether, it may hurt in the beginning when you're in a dark room and they turn on the light for the first time, you kind of, cover your eyes. But then it takes a few seconds, or who knows how long for a person. Eventually, when light is shed on truth, you either reject it or you allow it to enlighten you and live in peace and set you free. Absolutely. So it is hard, but that's how we grow. It's facing those hard issues that allow us to grow our love and our understanding of God's will through the trials that come, whether it's dealing, as you said, with maybe not being able to have children, or maybe a pregnant, unwed daughter or sister or what have you. It's through these trials that we have to rely on God's guidance. And yes, we do have to deal with them. That is part of our growth. That is part of our spiritual growth, our understanding, and our love.
And that's what the show is about, is really inviting you, our viewers, to an invitation to a sisterhood, because you know, somewhere along the line, May, we lost this sisterhood. We lost having each other's back. And Kathy mentioned it, a lot of women feel alone. They don't feel they have any support. And so that's why we need to support each other in issues like this and talk about these issues and help people. God calls us to help our brothers and sisters in times of need. And so, you know, and we invite you to take a pledge. We're going to share that with you like we do every show, is the pledge that we're asking you to take during this particular topic regarding the culture of life versus the culture of death in society. And so I think that's why it's so important that we look out to those sisters and that are struggling with this issue of abortion and other cultures of death issues.
I totally agree. We need to support one another. We need to uplift one another as women. You know, in these women's issues that come our way, that may directly or indirectly affect us. And the women need to know that they can turn to other women as sisters who will help them get through this and help them to guide them on the right path. And so...
and we're going to guide them on the right path through as we end the show, we're going to end it with a pledge. And so we ask you to stay with us as we share with you our Sisterhood Pledge.